The weapons that modern medicine uses to fight cancer are very powerful indeed. Chemotherapy drugs target cancer cells. There's a lot of collateral damage in their wake. One of the worst side effects of both the treatment and the actual disease is the pain. It's always present and follows you around like your shadow. What if the pain was so bad you would do anything to make it go away? Would it be worth risking a criminal conviction or even your life? Content warning: this tale contains explicit descriptions of drug abuse. If you missed the fifth tale, routine, please don't forget to listen to the reading. I'll drop a hover card in the upper right that you can click on or in the description below. The tales are best read in sequential order. I hope that you'll find this particular tale interesting, and please feel free to leave any comments or feedback. This is the sixth tale of Cancerika with 6 more to go, so I'm really hoping you like the overall story. Please know if it's any good or not. If you happen to have your own cancer experience you'd like to share, that'd be wonderful too. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can catch more tales as they are released. Please enjoy the sixth tale of Cancerika, Escape, Together We Cry. Cancerika, Tales of Survival, Despair, and Hilarity. Written and narrated by Paul Beauheart. Tale number 6, Escape, Together We Cry. "Lord save us, we're going to drown," he replied. "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" And he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and was completely calm. Matthew chapter 8, verses 26 to 27. Completing the big programming project in my off time made me feel like I was living the 80s yuppie dream Michael J. Fox had and the secret of my success. Even though I had gotten a bit sick on that Zoom call, the kudos from the CEO, Mr. Greel, made me think I was going to rocket sled right into management and become a suit. Not that I wanted anything of the sort, but the fact that the option was available was one of the first times I felt like I could have really gone places career-wise. I actually imagined myself driving around in an Audi, playing golf on Saturdays and joking about that new cart girl on the links, and bossing around people at work instead of actually doing work. It was because of this pride, greed, and hubris that my judgment became completely clouded the following week while I was still on medical leave. I took a wee bit of a stumble, and when I say stumble, I mean I felt thousands of feet off the side of Half Dome Trail at Yosemite. The pain in my back had been getting slightly worse all week, and I had unwisely decided to bump up my Jamidone dosage by half a pill per day. The hospital had given me a few extra ones, or it had not taken a couple during the first crazy week. I couldn't recall. So I had some extra jammies in my cancer med stash. I figured that since I had a doctor's appointment on Friday afternoon after the presentation at work, my plan would be to tell him that the serotonin was really doing a number on my back, and I needed more of those feel-good pills. I was a cancer victim, so I figured they would treat me like pharmaceutical consumer royalty around the place, and just write whatever scripts I needed. I patiently sat around the oncology wing of the hospital for my blood work to get analyzed, so I could see the doctor about getting my opiate allotment upped. Like raiding around for the dope man behind the liquor store, he finally told me to come over. "So, how are we feeling after the little trip to the ER last week?" the doctor asked. "I think I'm good to go on the sepsis front, Doc. No more bagels for this guy. But my back is starting to get a little bit worse," I replied. "Yes, well, as the chemotherapy fights the cells in your bone marrow and lymph nodes, you'll probably get more malignant proteins that can cause some calcium retention problems. But it shouldn't be too painful, though. The Jamidone dosage I prescribed is already pretty high," he stated. "Well, it's really becoming painful to even walk. Do you think I can get something more for the pain, like more Jamidones?" I wanted to ask if take-home injectable Demerol was a thing, but that would have been pushing my luck. The doctor leaned back and gave me a very quizzical look, clenched his lips, and went, It was not the response I was hoping for. "Here's the thing," he continued. "These are powerful opiates and very heavily regulated. They're very heavily regulated because they're very heavily addictive and can be very heavily abused." "Are we sure about that, Doc? Because I watched a documentary where they have babes fresh out of college selling these things to doctors' offices by the bulk, complete with Jamidone-themed swag and plushies and everything else under the sun," I replied. "Yes, I remember being a young doctor in the 2000s. Luckily, that era is over and done with. All opiates are strictly controlled now due to the ongoing drug addiction crisis. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied here. We'll have to keep your current Jamidone dosage. I know it's painful, but you're a strong young man. You'll be okay." Thanks, Dak. I understand, I mumbled. So not only would I not be getting a dosage increase, I would actually have to cut out that extra half-pill cherry I was taking every day at lunch. I was in a bit of a pickle, and my back pain was already getting worse. Going back to my apartment, I wondered what I could do to get my fix. I kept thinking of the times I got shot up with Demerol by the nursing staff when I was at the hospital. It felt fantastic, practically euphoric. I just wanted to get that feeling back. I wasn't some dope fiend after all. I had cancer. I deserved it. Since the doctor had quickly seen through my ruse to acquire more opiates, I began researching other options online. I felt like a serious nerd having to Google the proper way to abuse narcotics, but the pain was creeping in on me and there was no time for keeping up appearances. I found a neat tutorial on a super sketchy video site, ustreamit.com, that I initially thought was just for sharing pirate streams of MMA fights. Luckily, they had a whole section on drugs that was further categorized into the subgenres of cannabis, hallucinogens, and opiates. The tutorial actually showed you how to crush and shoot up Jamadone pills. The narrator was smart enough to not show his face, but you could hear him say, "Mixing it up with water and you get around that time release on the pill capsule." I watched as he carefully boiled some water on a spoon and then tapped in some crushed up powder of the pills on top of it. The vapor that cooked off the spoon looked absolutely delicious. After that, he put a cotton swab down on top to get out the nasty stuff, and then he sucked in the liquid through a needle. "When you do it this way, it hit you a lot faster. Know what I'm saying?" He said off camera as he showed the full syringe of liquidized Jamadone. "It ain't no fan, but it's still good." Eager to try this out, I headed straight down to the drugstore right near my apartment. Inside they had needles, some saline solution to use as the mixer, and rubbing alcohol to get everything cleaned up on my arm where I wanted to shoot up. I figured I might as well go the full Monty and just mainline it into my vein instead of shooting it in between my fingers or toes. Hopefully no one would notice the track marks. Good thing I preferred long sleeves. Seeing how it didn't look above board to be buying the injection drug user starter kit at 9 p.m. on a Friday night, I pulled the old trick we used to do when we were underage, buying booze. Back in the day, we would stroll into the drugstore with our fake IDs we photoshopped and laminated ourselves. But we sort of needed a contingency plan since some of those cashiers were real sticklers about not allowing minors access to beer. So we would load up on alcohol and buy a few candy bars to make it look like we were just doing some late night shopping. And then we would fetch weird, rarely purchased items from way in the back. Canned anchovies being a good example. We figured the clerk would be too lazy to want to put everything back on the shelves, so he'd just sell it to us without much of a fuss. Attempting to relive this adolescent genius in my early 30s, I threw 2 white drugstore tank tops and a Snickers bar into my hand basket and proceeded to the cashier. He rung up the skivvies, my candy bar, and then all my injection gear. "I got a medical condition, you know," I said to him. He was a gruff-looking Middle Eastern gentleman, and fortunately he looked totally uninterested. Perhaps they didn't have small talk in his homeland. I paid in cash and headed back to my apartment, giddy that I'd gotten away with it like I just bought a 24-pack of Busch Light when I was a teenager. I pulled out all the needles, swabs, saline, and alcohol and set it up on the bathroom counter. I sacrificed one of my cheap Walmart spoons by bending it into a contorted shape I could place a candle under. Although, when I got the jammies out from my cancer med stash, I suddenly had second thoughts. If I ruin these pills, I'll be in big trouble. There's no way I can make up some nonsense excuse about losing them to the doctor, and the back pain would be unbearable if they got trashed. I decided to keep the Jamadones as a plan B and seek out alternative avenues for procuring opiates. I had not done drugs or even really known anyone who did drugs in years, so calling my plug wasn't exactly an option. Additionally, I never did illicit opiates or even considered shooting up before, so I was definitely out of the loop on having a good connect. I could have tried going to one of those shady pill mill pharmacies where they prescribe opiates for stupid things like toothaches, but I saw in the local news that the feds were shutting those places down all over the city. What about that trap house, I thought. Before I was diagnosed with cancer, I would occasionally jog a few miles in the evening after an intense workout just to sweat out the toxins. I recall one time I took a detour off the main road because there was a bunch of heavy construction. I went down a side street that looked like the Battle of Aleppo had recently taken place. Some homes were still standing, albeit with broken windows. Some homes were collapsed into piles, and occasionally there was just an empty plot of land that may have once been a nice family home, but everything had returned to nature. Jogging further down the road, there were some youths riding around on custom-made BMX bikes in front of a home that must have been a beautiful Victorian 100 years ago. The roof was partially caved in and about half the windows were busted. They were joking around and hollering at each other, but all of a sudden they all turned to stare at me. I felt like I just walked onto the set of the first season of The Wire. I'm lucky that I have the kind of face and stature where I'm not perceived as a threat, but I'm not perceived as someone to mess with either. I've got sort of the Jeffrey Dahmer phenotype, someone who isn't necessarily intimidating at first glance, but upon closer thought may have a collection of severed heads in their apartment. The young lads kind of gave me a head nod and let me pass through unmolested. As I came past the collapsing trap house, I noticed two older men in the doorway. They gave me a pretty icy look and then looked back at the boys goofing around on the street. At the time, I just knew it was some sort of entrepreneurial operation. The trap house was a bit of a hike from my sore back, but I wasn't about to take a cab to a drug buy. As I walked through that particular neighborhood, I noticed that it appeared much more grimy than when I was quickly jogging through months prior. I had time to see all the discarded needles and empty plastic baggies strewn in the gutter. 3 men in their early 20s walked past me with their heads pointed down and their hands in their pockets. Their t-shirts were basically rags, and one of the guys had his big toe sticking out of his shoe. Some satisfied customers, I presume. When I got to the trap house, there was only one young man that looked like he was working, instead of a group of boys hanging around. He had a Yankees hat pulled way over his eyes, but he looked like he couldn't have been more than 18. "Yo, what's up, man?" he said to me. It'd been a while since I'd been around the drug scene, and I hadn't really thought this part of the transaction through. Hey there, I was hoping to get some, H? H? What are you talking about, bruh? You know, heroin. I was wondering if I could purchase some heroin. I spoke slowly and with hand gestures like I was trying to procure questionable exotic goods at a bazaar in Morocco. "I don't know about that. Don't you just want Fetty?" he asked. If he was talking about fentanyl, I would definitely have to pass. If I was going to do this, I fancied myself an old-school connoisseur of quality junk. I was going to be classy about it, like William Burroughs in late 1940s New York City. "Well, the thing is, I was really hoping to get some heroin. I've got money," I said as I showed him $200 bills. "Plus, I'm sick. Cancer, you know." "All right, hang on, Cancer Man," the youth said as he began quickly texting on his phone. He immediately got a ding on his phone and pointed me around back of the once glorious Victorian home. I casually strolled around the side of the house to what at one time might have been the entrance for the servants to come in, so as not to disturb the dinner party guests. A gentleman in a hoodie about my age was waiting for me. Even though his clothes were baggy, I could tell he was strapped by the bulge protruding from his belt. "Hey, my man, what do you want heroin for? Almost no one's asked for that since Obama was around," he asked in a somewhat friendly manner. "I've got cancer, and I guess I just need it for medicine. Can I get some?" I asked, trying to be sympathetic. "You can get it. I don't have much, though. Just keep a bit for the old-timers," he replied. "You got 100? "Sure." I handed over one of the Benjamins, and he gave me a small bag with a brownish white powder in it. "I guess that's heroin," I thought unremarkably. "All right, man, come back tomorrow night. We'll have more," he said. "Thanks. Take care." I said this like I was saying farewell to Cousin Jimmy at a family reunion. It's always best to be friendly when you're shopping local. Recalling how I used to walk around with an eighth of weed while working at the Dungeon Keep, I stuffed the bag of smack deep down in my sock. I flinched with pain when I bent down. "Hey, what kind of cancer you got?" the man asked. "Serotonia. It's bad," I replied. "Oh, my uncle had that. It's a tough one. Good luck, man," he said. "Thank you," I replied politely. I left the apocalyptic neighborhood toward the boulevard that cut through the city. Walking home, I began to feel an incredible sense of nervousness. Unlike the hospital's government-sanctioned narcotics, there was no telling what on earth this powder was cut with. It could have been bleach, it could have been fentanyl, or worse, there could be no heroin at all, and it was just a mix of baby powder and motor oil, for all I knew. Walking into my apartment, I pulled the bag out of my sock and inspected it under the fluorescent glow. The light brown hue reminded me of making oatmeal as a child. I loved the brown sugar that got packaged with it and would suck it down maniacally while playing Donkey Kong Country on my beat-up old N64. As an adult, I guess I would be reliving that dopamine rush once again. I justified the massive violation of my sobriety by thinking I would be shooting heroin out of necessity, not just for fun. The pain had gotten worse just strolling around the city, and immediate action was needed. It wasn't my fault that the modern medical establishment is hamstrung by regulations that can't prevent my suffering. If I was going to be a survivor, I need to get a little bit creative and break a few rules. First, I put the candle under the spoon I'd originally set up for jamadones and boiled a bit of water. I then used a tiny spoon for mixing coffee to scoop the heroin out of the bag. I dropped it on the big Walmart spoon carefully and thankfully didn't spill any. The odor it gave off kind of smelled sour, like cat pee. I put the cotton swab on top of the spoon, like in the video tutorial, and pulled the plunger back just a little bit on the syringe. The cotton swab had some debris on it, but the liquid looked pretty clean in the syringe's vial. Although I didn't really have any other experience to compare it to, so I sort of just hoped for the best. Well, let's blast off, I thought. I found the place on my left arm where they had been collecting my blood at the hospital for lab testing. I slapped at my vein like I'd seen the junkies do on TV for theatrical effect. Then I generally pricked my skin with the tip of the needle. I pulled back just a bit and then jammed the plunger all the way in. And pow! I was Dorothy in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, floating through the poppy field. Gentle explosions were going off repeatedly in my head. I didn't feel any more pain in my back. Heck, I wasn't even sure if I had a back. I fumbled toward the door and decided I should probably take a stroll outside just in case I needed the old Narcan treatment from a passing Good Samaritan. Walking through the narrow corridor of my crummy apartment complex felt like I was strolling through an Avicii video. There were choreographed lights and beautiful melodies rubbing against my mind. Every step was like dancing on an electric platform. The high was amazing. This wasn't just a painkiller. I was following a tradition. I was Jim Morrison strolling down Venice Beach, composing songs in his head. I was Kurt Cobain playing his first gig in Seattle. I was River Phoenix partying at the Viper Room, and hopefully not dying on the street afterwards. I made my way out of the corridor of the apartment complex, past the glass security door, and into the warm glow of the city's night sky. I stared up at the moon and opened my mouth like I was a zombie, half remembering something beautiful from my previous life. The lights of the cars passing across me made it feel like I was being transported away in some sort of intergalactic cocoon. Moving with the traffic flow of the one-way street, I headed down to the trendy entertainment district half a mile from my apartment, the Norwax district. Young couples were out and about on Friday evening in their hippest vintage clothes, en route to buying $20 gimlets. This wasn't exactly my crowd, but I felt the need to be around people for the voyeuristic enjoyment alone. I accidentally walked right into a mean-looking woman in a flannel. She gave me a little shove, saying, "Excuse you." Her man-bun boyfriend stared at me in horror like I was a derelict. "Sorry about that," I said. It reminded me of Hunter S. Thompson in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas when he was stumbling around at Circus Circus while high on ether. I chuckled to myself at the reference. I walked into an open-air beer pavilion to try and get a cold soda. There were large groups of hip youngsters congregated at tables, sucking down expensive pitchers of IPA. "What is this beard oil convention nonsense?" I mumbled. My speech was slurring uncontrollably. Despite the atmosphere of merrymaking, they all seemed to stop what they were doing when I walked into their general vicinity. They gave me a sympathetic look like I was going to shamble up to every single table and ask for something to eat. As I continued to walk around the pavilion, I realized I had an odd cadence that consisted of a low stumble on my left foot and then a high bounce on my right foot. "Hey man," I asked a young waiter who regarded me with wild-eyed suspicion. "Can I order a soda, please?" A massive security guard suddenly appeared like a wild Pokemon and tapped me on the shoulder. "Sir, are you okay? You'll need to go, please." "I'm sorry," I practically drooled. "I'll leave now." I walked past the axe-throwing area on the way out and stopped to marvel at an attractive young woman's technique. I stared at her in trance for what I believe was over a minute. A less attractive woman off to my side looked at me with a deep sense of discomfort. The same security guard walked up behind me and said, "Sir, can you please leave now?" "Yep, I'm going," I mumbled in apologetic fashion. I hustled out of there and headed further down the boulevard that cut through the metropolis like an artery. The trendy cocktail lounges gave way to commercial buildings that were closed for the evening. The street became very quiet as I stumbled on. I eventually came to the urban confluence where the boulevard meets the freeway. There was rusty fencing and barbed wire to prevent pedestrians from crossing under the dark void of the freeway span, but the local vagrants had cut a hole in the corner. I ducked through the fencing trying to avoid tetanus and popped up in the concrete oasis. Underneath the freeway, there were a lot of tents set up and even a few dusty cars sitting on tires that had been flat for years. Two men were sitting around a fire like hobos, but they didn't pay attention to me. I thought it might have been scary under there, like Snake Plissken strolling the ruins of imprisoned New York, but it had a surprisingly warm vibe. The glow from the fire highlighted the murals on the concrete pillars that held up the freeway. One of them was a very detailed spray painting of two muscle cars drag racing, but the drivers were both aliens with little antennae protruding from their green heads. Another mural was a big one of a little girl with a scarf blowing on a dandelion that gently came apart into tiny seeds. There was graffiti everywhere, but no one had dared tag over that mural of the little girl, a true sign of respect for the artist. I leaned up against a concrete barrier and caught my breath. I was still pretty high, but I was starting to come down from my peak. After loitering under the freeway for 15 minutes, the exhaustion and anemia started to creep in. The classic 90s tune, Under the Bridge, started playing in my mind, as if on cue from a cosmic playlist. Suddenly, I felt a profound sadness. What was the point of all this? Living in the city like rats in a cage? What were we doing? Barely surviving day to day, taking drugs just to get by. For a moment, I forgot all about my own cancer-related self-pity, and I began to cry for humanity in general. It's actually a beautiful moment to be able to step outside of your own suffering, especially while high. After transcending my mere individual consciousness, I decided I needed a more simplistic goal of heading home before I fell asleep on the city streets. Barely making it through the door of my apartment, I collapsed into my bed and fell into a deep, deep, dreamless slumber. When I woke up, I felt slightly regretful and very nauseous. I wasn't sure whether it was just the byproduct of my regular chemotherapy regimen or if it was because I was dope sick. They always warned us when we were kids that we could get hooked on drugs if we only tried them once. Perhaps heroin is what they were talking about. I went to the bathroom and checked what was left of the bag I purchased the prior evening. There's plenty of the brown powder left to keep me going for a while. I didn't want to get as high as I did the first time, but I wanted to keep some on hand to supplement whatever pain pills my doctor was giving me. That was, of course, how I justified to myself having illicit narcotics sitting around my apartment. Seeing how the gentleman at the trap house had invited me over that evening to purchase more, I knew it would be uncouth and rude not to drop by. I decided to plan a day of busy work to keep myself occupied until then. So, I took a long walk through the park, I cleaned up my apartment from top to bottom, and I made a tuna sandwich for lunch. It was only noon, but all I could think of was getting more heroin in the nighttime. It was front and center in my mind no matter what I was thinking about. After all, it had felt so great the night before. I tried to doom scroll X for a while, but I got incredibly restless after only 10 minutes. I used to be able to screw off on my phone for hours during COVID. I peeked at my setup in the bathroom. The spoon was still sitting out, and it had black residue across the face where the heroin water mixture had cooked up. I closed my eyes and could almost smell the acrid yet appetizing odor of ammonia. Maybe I'll just take a quick taste to keep my head straight, I thought. Besides, my back hurts. Well, my back didn't actually hurt on that particular Saturday, but I just couldn't get that euphoric feeling out of my head. I put a bit of powder on my pinky finger and snorted it Pulp Fiction style. I immediately regretted doing this as my nasal cavity, already banged up due to the serotonin, started bleeding. I rubbed the blood heroin slurry running down my nose into my mouth and swallowed the disgusting mixture. After 10 minutes, I felt a lot better. I wasn't high, but I didn't feel like I was careening into the pits of withdrawal. Finally, the sun went down and I knew it was time to go make another score. I walked down to the blown-out neighborhood, but this time there was quite a number of what appeared to be customers. About 20 people were gathered in a semicircle around the youth in the Yankees hat I had seen the previous evening. "Yo, calm down, everybody. Just get in line, get in line," the overwhelmed youth said, trying to corral everyone. Queuing and waiting in line, finally something I excelled at. I followed in behind a very emaciated woman who had blisters across the corner of her mouth. "Hey, why is it so busy today?" I asked, trying to make chit-chat. "First of the month," she said. "Them government checks come in. I got mine, but it's not enough. They keep screwing me. I tell them I got 3 kids." She kept rubbing her face while she talked. I tried to lend a sympathetic ear, but her attention seemed to be focused on the line ahead. One by one, people were handing their money to the youth. he would send a text, and then they would be directed around the back of the collapsing Victorian house. The people waiting to buy drugs on that particular Saturday evening reminded me of ghosts, apparitions who lurk in the streets of every city across the country. We know that they are there, but we do our best to ignore them. Society has deemed it appropriate to give these people a small amount of government benefits and access to the open-air asylum of our urban core until they eventually kill themselves off. A bit depressing. In my mind, I was very different, of course. I was no junkie. I was special. My cancer gave me the excuse to engage in this type of illicit, antisocial behavior. It was medicinal and not thrill-seeking. That's how big of a moron I was. After 20 minutes, it was my turn in line. I gave the youth a small roll of $300 in 20s. "Yeah, I remember you, Cancer Man. I got what you want today. Go around back," he said after getting the customary notification beep from his phone. Walking up to the house, I noticed it was a different man from the previous evening. He was much more surly. He thrusted a baggie with the brown powder into my head and said, hurry up, get out of here, move it along." Not saying a word, I stepped back and stuffed the heroin down my sock. It was a massive amount of dope, and I had absolutely no idea how long it would last. Coming out from around the side of the house, I suddenly heard that familiar sound of tires screeching and sirens blasting. I immediately had flashbacks of rowdy high school parties getting broken up by the cops because someone threw lawn furniture in the neighbor's pool. However, I knew the consequences that evening were going to be a lot more severe than the police telling me to just go home. 5-0, man, someone yelled, and people were scrambling every which way but loose. 2 squad cars had screeched up, and 4 cops got out in unison. You could hear more sirens coming down from a nearby side street. It was like they were busting El Chapo. The youth in the Yankees hats sprinted down the street so fast, I figured he must have run high school track. There was no way the cops were getting him. However, the customers were much less athletic. The woman I was chatting with started to run away with a limp, but one of the police officers said, Stop, you're going to get a felony resist." He grabbed her by the back and threw the cuffs on her. 2 other men were trying to run past the squad cars out toward the boulevard. They're moving their hips from side to side like it was a basketball game, and they're trying to juke out the cop to dribble around him. The police officer grabbed the one on the right, and he went down quickly. The other guy took off running, and the police didn't bother chasing him. "Oh, man," the down man said. "I ain't holding. I'm just here with a friend." In my online addicted brain, I actually thought I was only a passive observer in all this commotion during the brief moments it began. It suddenly dawned on me that I needed to get out of there as well. Obviously, my bones were crippled because of the cancer, so running wasn't an option. Rather, I decided to make a quiet shamble back towards civilization in the hopes I was ignored. It was a long shot, and it did not work at all. Hey, where do you think you're going?" a cop yelled at me. "Oh, I was just passing through," I said. "Sorry about that." "Get down on the ground right now, stupid." I never had any sort of interaction with the police where they assumed I was a literal criminal. I mostly just had to deal with speeding tickets and such. So I thought it would be advisable to pull out my wallet and show some identification, like this was all a routine traffic stop. "Whoa, what are you doing?" The cop immediately drew his 9mm from its holster. It's super cliche, really, but looking down the barrel of the gun at a trap house really does make you question your life's decisions up to that point. "Just getting my ID," I said. "You dummy, I almost shot you. Get on the ground, now, face first." I laid with my face on the cold pavement, perfectly still, as the police officer put the cuffs behind my back. "Is there something in your pocket that's going to stick me?" the cop demanded. "I'm not getting stuck tonight." "No, sir," I said. "Top left sock is what you're looking for." I couldn't see what was going on with my face on the ground, but the cop pulled out the bag from my sock, and I heard him talk to another cop. "Whoa, this is close to a felony possession rap. This guy was partying tonight." The 2 officers then started hamming it up and laughing. I stayed quiet and was relocated to the back of a squad car. More cops showed up, and there were several people in handcuffs. A woman came by in civilian clothes. From cop shows, I knew she was either super high-ranking or part of some other agency. She was talking with everyone and doing paperwork. I stared out the window and watched it all unfold for about an hour, wondering what was going to happen to me. Guantanamo Bay, perhaps? More of a pressing concern was that I needed to take my stupid chemotherapy meds for the evening. The officer who arrested me opened the squad car and sat in front. "So, we're going to take you down to the station for the night, okay?" "I understand. Thank you, officer," I replied. You seem pretty smart. Why'd you put your hand in your pocket, man? I almost shot you, the cop asked. Sorry about that, I said in a defeated voice. What are you doing buying heroin out here? You don't look like a junkie, he asked. Is then I noticed he had the classic eagle, globe, and anchor tattoo of the Marine Corps on his right forearm. Nice hat. Where were you at? I said, trying to go with a friendly approach rather than an aloof one. Oh, this? It's been a while. I spent some time in Iraq, Ramadi in 2006. Place sucked. He said like we were sharing a drink in a bar together. Yeah, I was in Kandahar. It also sucked, I said. Well, you're messed up now, Devil Dog. What are you doing here tonight? I'm on chemotherapy and need something for the pain, I said. Really? What kind of cancer? Serotonin. It's rough, brother, the cop said. He exited the squad car and opened the door next to me. I was hoping he was going to let me run off into the road like little Tibby saving the family dog that was about to be euthanized. Look, my lieutenant is here doing paperwork and everything's on body cam. I can't let you go, but let me loosen those cuffs. I felt the ratchet slack up and the cuffs were then just kind of jangling behind my back. Also, we haven't weighed and tested it yet, but you had a lot of drugs on you. Don't worry though, I'll make sure it's just a misdemeanor citation. Thank you, bro, I said. We pulled away and cruised through the city. It was kind of weird being in a cop car driving around. All the traffic around you is on their best behavior. A group of clean-cut teenagers pulled up next to us at a red light. I gave them a goofy smile and head nod, but they looked at me terrified, like I'd been arrested for mass murder. When we arrived at the police station, we pulled inside some bay doors into what sort of looked like a large garage. There were several police SUVs parked in there, along with more cops waiting on people to presumably intake the evening's riffraff into holding cells. A female police officer began asking me questions, looking down at a checklist on an iPad. Are you currently intoxicated? No. Are you currently suicidal? No. Are you currently on narcotics? No. Are you currently on medication? Yes, cancer medications. The officer looked away from the iPad. But these are not psych meds, right? You're not going to freak out tonight, are you? I don't think so, I said. We'll get your meds sorted later, she said, not seeming very concerned. It was then that a familiar face came down the corridor that led from the inside of the police station to the garage. I was so embarrassed that I tried to stand behind the squad car to let him walk past me. Friend of yours? The female cop asked, giggling. The man was in deep conversation with two police officers and looked like he was trying to explain something complex with his hands, perhaps the theory of relativity or the meaning of life. When he saw me, he didn't seem surprised at all. Well, good evening. Nice to see you here, he said with a $1 million smile, standing next to me while I hung my head shamefully in the cuffs. Hey, Pastor Jim, I mumbled. It was the pastor who had baptized me from my church. End of tale. Thank you for having listened to this tale of Cancerika. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below whether you like the story or not. A forthcoming ebook, print book, and audiobook with all 12 tales will be released later in 2025 on Amazon and Audible. Details will be posted below in the description when it's released. You can shoot your mouth off at me over on X. I'm at Beauheart. Please visit friendlyfrogpress.com to see our collection of ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks that are for sale at Amazon and Audible. Until next time, this is Paul Beauheart signing off.